All right, good afternoon for friends in the United Arab Emirates and here in the Middle East. And good morning to all of our colleagues in Washington, D.C. and the United States. Welcome back from hopefully a wonderful Labor Day weekend in the United States. I'm Danny Seabright, President of the U.S.-UAE Business Council, and we're dedicated to advancing bilateral commercial relations between the U.S. and the U.A.E. We are pleased to be co-hosting today's event with DLA Piper, which is a premier global law firm and a valued founding member of the Business Council since the Business Council was founded. I've been working with DLA here in the region since the early 2000s, and just a wonderful partner with which to do work in the broader region and in Dubai in particular. We're joined today by a great panel of speakers from DMCC, DIFC, and Citibank. Our speakers will offer important perspectives on recent developments within the Dubai business climate and the UAE reform business movement writ large. The topic of today's discussion has been made even more timely by the announcement just a few days ago that the UAE will institute 50 new economic initiatives known as the Projects of the 50 to advance economic competitiveness and boost foreign direct investment in the months ahead. All of these 50 are meant to be announced and rolled out over the next number of weeks before the UAE's Golden Jubilee in early December. The launch of the 50 comes as the UAE celebrates 50 years of unification and is designed to lay the foundation for the future success of the UAE. We will be hosting an event next week in Washington, D.C. with the Minister of Economy, where he will detail this important initiative, and also in New York at the SALT conference and with private investors so that he and his colleagues from the Ministry of Economy can say more about opportunities for investment in the United Arab Emirates. We will share a registration link in the chat function for those events. I should note that we have nearly 300 registered guests for today's webinar, comprising business executives, government officials, and thought leaders. As is the case, many register and watch our events afterwards, and we expect usually double the number that will eventually watch the event, view the event in the coming days. We're excited, as I am in Dubai right now in DLA's office, to get back to face-to-face meetings, as this is a hybrid event. And we're having a face-to-face component with a virtual component. And this is going to be the future of the way we try to do and accomplish most of our events. Friends on the line today from business executives, government officials, and thought leaders are various U.S. government agencies, including the U.S. Commercial Service, the U.S. Department of State, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Various UAE government agencies are online, including the Dubai Health Authority, the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology, and the UAE Embassy in Washington, D.C., the UAE Consulate in New York, the U.S. Consulate in Dubai, and the Dubai Chamber are also with us today. Finally, it's very critical that we do more outreach in the United States, across the 50 United States. We have the Projects of the 50 to promote and present to the 50 United States. And in that vein, in that spirit, today we have representatives from Florida, Virginia, and Maryland also on the call. And finally, we have friends, colleagues from what I call the fourth estate. We have friends from the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and law.com. Thank you for joining us today. This session is on the record. It is being live streamed. As I said, a video will be available later for everyone to watch from our website. If you want to ask a question, please put it into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to the questions and have a discussion as part of the presentation. I'd like to now turn over the floor for introductory remarks to a very close friend and a colleague, someone who I have collaborated with, worked with for the last decade and more, Ramsey Jurdy, who serves as a senior partner at DLA Piper in the Dubai office where I'm sitting right now. The Business Council just this morning published a corporate spotlight on DLA Piper. If you have not already had a chance to read through it, we will also include that link to the spotlight in the chat function so you might see it. Ramsey has been with DLA since 2016 and has over 15 years of experience as an attorney. Ramsey's practice groups focus on international dispute resolution, trade, and regulatory matters. Ramsey has long been a champion of the U.S.-UAE trade and investment relationship. Ramsey, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Sorry, Ramsey, go ahead and go again.
Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Danny, for that very kind introduction. Thank you to you and the U.S.-UAE Business Council for organizing this event, and indeed the support that you've given me and DLA Piper over the 10, 15 years that we've been working together. Economic adversity, bad financial results, often, forces innovation and adaptation. And what I'm seeing is that the UAE is quickly adapting to the economic adversity over the last 2 years, you could say, or is it a year and a half now? And as I've thought about the projects of the 50 that you're going to hear about today, and the future plans, I thought about the history, and I kind of thought that there might be 2 or 3 chapters in the development of the UAE. From 2005 to 2012, you had this real estate driven boom. And then from the early 2010, 2012 till about a year ago, we had a tourism, trade, logistics driven boom. And I think about what's going to happen in the future. I see this as the beginning of a 3rd chapter that our panelists will talk about today. And I love the field of dreams analogy. For those of you who are familiar with that American classic, which was used much more often in the early days of 2005, 2006. And the key that I see of these recent announcements is, if you build it, they will come. And the message there is, the UAE is the best place to live and to work, anywhere in Africa and the Middle East. And what we're going to hear about today is how the UAE is going to hold and grow that position as other countries come to compete, and how the UAE is maturing from a regional hub to a global hub. We've moved on from a focus on the Saudi Arabian market and Iraq market and Afghanistan market. What I see nowadays is China, Russia, Africa. Those are the continents or regions that UAE business and professionals that come to live and work here are thinking about when they come here. So with that, I'll turn it over back to Danny, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the panelists what the future looks like.
Ramsey, thank you for that. And again, just thank you so much for your partnership and thought leadership over the years. It's really, really critical, and we very much appreciate it. We'd like to now hear from Natalia Toombs. Natalie is a senior associate at DLA Piper and has been with the firm at the Dubai office since 2016. Her practice includes cross-border, multi-jurisdictional, public and private M&A, joint ventures, group reorganizations, and general corporate advisory work. Natalia, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you for that introduction. As you say, I'm part of DLA Piper's corporate practice here in the UAE. And part of my practice is advising international clients on setting up and doing business here in the UAE and the region more generally. I came to DLA in Dubai in 2016, but I actually first came to the region to work in 2012. And what I've really noticed is that there's a clear acknowledgement from the UAE leadership that foreign investment really drives business opportunities, increases trade, creates jobs, and helps develop technology and knowledge locally. And much like Ramsey, I think in my time here, I've seen this push to move Dubai from being a regional business hub to an international business hub. And I think the announcement of the principles of the 50, which I'm sure we'll talk about in more detail, show us that we can expect to see that drive to continue further through the years. For us as a practice, we see continued levels of foreign investment into the country, particularly in, for example, software and IT services. And then I think the statistics in the Emirate really bear this out. In the last 3 years, that sector in particular has represented $2 billion of investment, thousands of jobs created, but we see booms in lots of sectors, in fintech, in life sciences. I really see Dubai as holding a unique position in its location, its ability to very quickly roll out initiatives to promote development in entrepreneurship, and having a leadership which has a really clear economic, social, and cultural strategy.
Thank you, Natalia. We look forward to following up on a couple of those points, particularly the new UAE data law that Minister Olama spoke about the other day. I think it will be important as one of the 50 to say a few words about that at some point here in the discussion. If I could turn now to Zoltan Schwardi, who's the Middle East and Turkey commercial bank head for Citibank. Zoltan is currently located in the UAE and has been with Citi for over 20 years. Zoltan joined the Citi commercial bank team in the United Arab Emirates at the end of 2015 as head of mid-market enterprises. In March 17, he was promoted to the current role of Citi commercial banking head for the United Arab Emirates, and effective in September 18, Zoltan's role was expanded to become the Middle East cluster head. Zoltan works closely with a very wonderful friend of ours, Elisar Antonius, and Citi is also a founding member of the Business Council now, having elevated its membership, as is DLA Piper. So Zoltan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Danny, and Ramzi as well. Thanks for the invitation for the US and UAE Business Council on behalf of Citi. And I'm very excited to be here. I think that this is a topic that is very timely, and as well as in terms of the measures that we see in UAE, I think it's just historical. And what is amazing to see is actually how UAE is able to turn crises into opportunities. And what I see today from a banking perspective is that I think Ramzi mentioned it before, that today it's much more broad-based than what it was before, right? It was certain sectors that emerged, but this time what I feel is that it's just across the board, many industries are striving at a time when actually you had to face COVID, probably one of the most unexpected crises that you can face. And it was a global pandemic, very hard hitting UAE, because some of the industries like travel, tourism is the backbone of the UAE economy. And still the way UAE responded with, for example, vaccination and taking very quick measures actually give an edge over other economies for UAE. So I think that it was a great example shown by the leadership of UAE, how you can, take advantage of the situation and with the right measures, diversify the economy. And all the measures that we are going to talk about today, I think speaks for itself. It attracts FDI to the country, and ultimately helping the local economy to grow and actually compete on a global level, right? We've been speaking about Dubai and UAE being a regional hub, but I think the aspiration now is how we can go global. And I think that this webinar is going to be, trying to address these points. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Zoltan. Thank you, Zoltan. And that we can't forget about a mention of the COVID pandemic and the impact. When I spoke to Ambassador Al-Otaiba the first time in January about the UAE's reform issues that it was going to undertake coming out of COVID, he emphasized that something like the Projects of the 50 was going to be unveiled in the run-up to the UAE's Golden Jubilee, to just set the UAE that much faster ahead and get it going that much faster out of the gate as COVID starts to subside. So again, to your point about using a crisis to move forward, Zoltan, very, very clear in the UAE's thinking from the very beginning of this, and very, very important. I'd like to introduce Salman Jaffrey, Chief Business Development Officer at DIFC. Salman has been with the DIFC for nearly 6 years. We had the chance to sit down face-to-face together yesterday at the DIFC and catch up. And Salman is incredibly thoughtful and very, very interesting things to say, insights on what's going on here on the ground, what's going on in the broader region. Salman is responsible in his job for developing and executing business strategies aligned with the DIFC's growth ambitions. In this capacity, Salman's focus is to develop and grow DIFC's proposition across key business sectors, including fintech, wealth and asset management, banking and capital markets, insurance and reassurance, and more. And I was able to walk through the DIFC's new hub, new entrepreneur innovation hub that they've created in the gate. And it's absolutely an amazing testament to the wonderful things that DIFC is doing and that Salman is working on. Salman, the floor is yours. Over to you.
So thank you, Danny. First of all, I hope everyone can hear me. Hope everyone is well. I'm really excited for today's conversation because I think the timing of this discussion is apt. Look, I think to put it into perspective, some of the earlier comments made by the earlier speakers resonate very, very strongly with me because, you know, the DIFC and indeed other free zones, one of the things that we share in common is the common objective of driving economic growth. So if you strip away the products, the propositions, some of the marketing, some of the global outreach, ultimately what we're about is increasing economic output. And that formula is in some ways rather simple, which is you want to get the absolute best talent around the world to come to live and work here and of course play. And you also want the commensurate type of capital to follow. And when you put those two things together the right way, great things happen. Okay, so the timing of the announcements on the projects of the 50 come at a particularly right time because I think, you know, the key question that we're trying to answer is how do you try and replicate the glossy, fast-paced growth of a frontier market when in fact you are transitioning into a mature or maturing emerging market? And there are lots of answers to that question, which I look forward to discussing with this panel today. So thanks, Danny, and back to you.
Thanks again. Thank you very, very much. Much appreciate that, Salman. Dear friend Sanjeev Dutta, Executive Director of Commodities and Financial Services at DMCC, is going to speak with us next. In his capacity, Sanjeev oversees DMCC's commodities vertical and directs the development, implementation, and regulation of the organization's financial products, platforms, and services. DMCC and DIFC are both free zones. DMCC and DIFC cater to different sorts of services in different ways. And we hope to draw a little bit of that out in the conversation, and especially the relevance of a free zone in the future in the UAE, given all the business reforms that are going on what we call the mainland. Sanjeev is a veteran of DMCC and has been with DMCC for over 12 years, and he's extremely well qualified to talk about these sorts of issues, the projections, the arc, if you will, of where this is all going. Sanjeev, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for this kind introduction and having me as a guest on this very esteemed panel. Just a bit of a correction. I've spent 17 years with DMCC. It's been an awesome journey, and in just a few months, UAE celebrates its Golden Jubilee, which is also awesome. And so, what a timely moment, this is to be having a conversation about Dubai's position as a regional, leading a business hub, which is a very, very major achievement for a nation as young as ours. I mean, the Emirate remains the chosen place to do business for many, and that is because of our strategic location, which happens to be at the crossroads of the world, between demand and supply. And that's complemented obviously with the right business ecosystem and frameworks. And we believe DMCC is a large part of that ecosystem. As Danny mentioned, we are a free zone with a mandate to facilitate and enable trade through Dubai. So we call ourselves as Made for Trade, and very committed to guaranteeing the ease of doing business. We'd rather focus on providing the support for our members to succeed. And being the largest and the fastest growing emirate in the emirate with over 19,000 companies, they choose us as their trusted partner. We're also a community which some of my colleagues mentioned, a live, work, play concept. I mean, that's what Dubai stands for. So the JLT, the Jumeirah Lakes Towers, the region where we are located, is basically promoted basis that live, work, play concept. And over the years, we very successfully developed some of the most dynamic, innovative market conditions and infrastructure to facilitate trade through Dubai. And these include obviously tea, coffee, diamonds, gold, the crypto center, and it keeps growing. We're focusing on cacao and so many other new projects, again, with the entire idea of, creating bilateral trade, creating a trade ecosystem out of Dubai. And as a result, we have played a very important role as well in the Emirate, where we contribute significantly to Dubai's GDP, and especially the non-oil GDP, which is the area of focus. So as we look ahead, we will continue to build our success story with partners such as yourselves, and the momentum of success needs to be maintained to ensure that we and Dubai remain at the head of the curve and a model to learn from. So I'm very much looking forward to this very exciting conversation. And thank you, Danny. Over to you.
Oops, there we go. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. Really appreciate that. I'm gonna do ladies' choice here, ladies first, if you will, to kick off our discussion. And I'd ask all of the panelists to please jump in with a two-finger intervention if you have something you want to add to something that anyone else is saying. And I want to remind the audience to please, if you have a question, please put it into the Q&A function so that I can try to put it up on the screen for folks. We have about 35 minutes here for the discussion. Natalia, Dubai has recently announced many of these new initiatives to support multinational companies, local businesses, and SMEs operating in the Emirate, or is considering establishing operations here. Just give us a quick thumbnail, if you will, of some of these initiatives and what will be the most impactful, in your opinion, for business in Dubai, please.
Sure. Well, when I was preparing for this panel, I obviously had a list of initiatives, and helpfully we had a whole new raft announced just within the last few days. So I'm sure most people on this call will have seen the announcement of the principles of the 50 and the 13 initiatives that were announced earlier this week. You mentioned, Danny, the data law, which will deal with how individuals' data is stored and processed. At this stage, we don't have much information beyond that, apart from that it's under consultation. We're aware that it's being discussed with people in the industry, and we're looking forward to seeing the published law. And obviously, we will release an update on that as soon as the law is available to us. Alongside that, we've seen some initiatives around visas. And I think this really goes to a comment that I think Salman made around attracting the sort of people that we want to come to Dubai, making the city a place that people want to be, and making life here a long-term decision rather than a short-term 2, 3, 4 year plan. So we see the green visas for skilled individuals and investors. We've also got the freelance visas for self-employed people and entrepreneurs. And previously we'd also had the golden visas announced. So there are moves towards making living in Dubai and the UAE, no longer necessarily tied quite so closely to an employer. And I see that really as wanting to encourage a nation of entrepreneurs, of people who are looking to set up here and create a home here.
Thank you. Anyone else want to just make a quick comment on the Project of the 50 or some of these reforms? Zoltan, I want to come to you next to talk specifically about banking and finance, but just on the general, at the top level, Salman, Sanjeev, do you have a comment you want to make?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what we just heard. Obviously, this is a changing climate. You know, we're trying to attract not only trade, but also attract people into, you know, turning this into a more long-term destination. And those are the measures that we see very proactively being taken by the leaders of the country. I think these policies have come in over the last couple of years, and it's only been augmented by the way, you know, the leadership has enabled us handle the pandemic. And very interestingly, you know, DMCC has witnessed amazing growth, especially during the last couple of years, and coincidentally also during the financial crisis in 2008-9. So typically I've seen, you know, that during times of challenge and test, I think the prosperity is you know, unparalleled. That's what I thought I'd say.
We have another lawyer as a guest in the audience, Salah Al-Abaidi, and he asked the question, and Sanjeev and Salman, to what extent you said, Sanjeev, a word about the long-term investment, trying to attract that. And Salah asks, what value do you see the foreign direct investment adding to the economy of the UAE in the next few years? Maybe Salman, you want to take a crack at that, and then Sanjeev, and then Salman, any other comment you have? You're on mute. You're on mute, Salman. Sorry.
We've only been doing this for 18 months, and you figured we'd get it right. I know. Look, I think there are a couple of things to unpack, right? First of all, several things drive economic growth. FDI is one of them. So you need to have the rules and the regulations and the recourse, both contractually and regulatorily, to make sure that whether it's public or private capital that comes in to Dubai, UAE, that it's comfortable staying there and investing there. And to that end, right, the different free zones have frameworks. The DIFC is the only financial free zone in Dubai, and so we're particularly well suited to ensure contractual, legal, and regulatory certainty, right? We have an independent regulator, et cetera. I mean, the other thing is you have to be able to enable and sustain a long-term investment, right? So very quickly, we have bankers on the call. I mean, something like $180 billion worth of assets get written out of the DIFC, and an additional $100 billion get sold here and booked elsewhere. That's a lot of capital. That's a lot of asset creation from capital that is being gathered. And the same thing with asset management, right? The only way that you have almost $500 billion worth of is if the environment and the rules and regs provide that comfort and that certainty. So, you know, to all of our partners in the legal profession, including DLA Piper and others, you guys play a critical role in enabling the improvement of those rules and regs, and to make sure people know about it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I second that. You know, it's just not about creating the ecosystem and the infrastructure, but you know, people draw, you know, unparalleled comfort through the regulatory environment. And you know, if today I were to work with the DIFC fully knowing that there is a sound arbitration mechanism in the event of a default, etc., it only gives me a lot of comfort. And likewise for DMCC or any other of these free trade zones which want to incubate trade and grow trade. And as a matter of fact, there is an increasing focus on not only creating new trade routes with initiatives such as the World Logistics Passport, etc., but also there's a lot of thrust on non-oil trade economy. And, you know, we want to get to that 2 trillion mark by the year 2025. And the good news is that we're well on course to achieving that.
I heard
If
you
I
say
could just make
2 trillion by 2025.
Yeah.
If I could just make one more quick observation, one of the reasons why these synergies work really well with DMCC and DIFC is because, as you've gathered, right, you need underlying economic activity to finance it. And so the idea that you have trade facilitated by free zones and financing facilitated by other free zones makes it a really formidable combination for Dubai.
Got it.
And,
Now,
and maybe,
Zoltan,
Danny, still on the same subject. And
yeah,
the
well, I wanted
reforms.
you to, Zoltan, I wanted you to, from the banking perspective, now pull it all together for us from a banker's view.
I'll try. Look, I think that first of all, reflecting on all the reforms, what is very important from a banking financial perspective is, and this is something that I want to emphasize, the long-term strategy, right? Because what we have seen in the past, that people came to Dubai or UAE in general, trying to do business, and it was with a very short-term view, trying to make high return that is kind of in line with the risk that they are taking, and then if there is an economic downturn, leaving the country. With these reforms, what I see that is different is that the government is trying to address that level of uncertainty that obviously businesses don't like, right? You want to come, you want to put your capital to work, and you're fine getting probably a smaller return, but you want a long-term sustainable business. And I think that all these different measures that we are seeing today, by the way, I think these are like historical changes, is going to help UAE establishing a very diversified and long-term place to establish your business. I think this is extremely important. And when it comes to FDI, and I think that's kind of the big question here, is that how do we attract FDI in a meaningful, sustainable manner? And I think that 2020 and probably 2021, and we don't have too much data for 21, but it's just amazing, right? If you look at 2020 globally from an FDI perspective, it was not a good year. In fact, it was quite a bit of shock because of obvious reasons, because of COVID. There was a contraction globally that is probably in the tune of 40%. So you would say that any country who can maintain FDI compared to 2019 on the same level is doing a great job. Guess what? What happened in UAE? It went up almost with the same percentage as the global FDI flow went down, so 40%. Very substantial figure. Why? The reason was because people felt comfortable coming to UAE on the back of the quick decisions in terms of vaccination, the measures that the government took to battle COVID. And you might say that, okay, fine, this is short term, right? And COVID is going to go away. So that's why I think the measure that you see today is a kind of a forward-looking policy for the country, how to make sure that it's not a one-time inflow of FDI, but it's something sustainable for the future. Now, the other point that I wanted to make perhaps is how the businesses that we deal with, and I'm talking about multinational companies, and I'm talking about SMEs and mid-sized companies, they are very upbeat, right? They feel that the measures that they are seeing and looking forward to the details of the 50 on 50. But in general, there is this positive vibe around the business community that the government is sending a strong message that we want businesses to come, strive, and stay.
So when Minister Bintuk visits the US next week, that's exactly what he's going to say. And that's exactly what he's hoping to do, is to achieve more foreign direct investment from the United States to come to the UAE and set up for the long term. with the goal of diversifying the economy, away from oil and gas, and diversifying it even further than the amazing progress that's been made already. From each of the panelists' perspectives, we know that data is a priority. We know that anything in the digital economy, anything in healthcare is a priority. Would you rank any other industries as key industries that American investors should be thinking about, and American companies that want to come here and set up shop should be thinking about? You want to give me your top 2 or 3, each of you, starting with Natalia, and Ramsey, jump in if you have something you want to say on that regard.
I think I agree with all of the sectors that you said, Danny. I think, as I mentioned at the start, we're also seeing lots of work happening in fintech and that sort of market. There seems to be a real boom in, and maybe Zoltan can talk about what Citi are doing, but a real focus on transforming the financial marketplace with new technologies. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there that we see with our clients coming up.
And Salman, innovation is key, right? In this, it's not just bringing new business. It's not just coming up and setting something else new up, but there has to be innovation as part of the investment, right?
Yeah, I think it's critical, and I think it's important to unpack the reason why. Because yes, innovation in tech is really sexy and all that kind of stuff, but if you really peel back why that's important, it's simply because we're aiming for jobs that a lot of economists think may generate 5 to 20x the productivity of the traditional service-related job. And if you assume that a small country with a still relatively small population, can't double overnight, right? And so to get that lift in economic growth, you need to be able to create those kinds of jobs. I mean, we have 27,000 people in the DIFC and over 3,000, 500-ish companies, right? But if our aspiration is to increase our GDP contribution to financial services, which is currently like about 5%, if we're going to get that to 8 and 9%, Singapore is around 11 or 12, by the way. Those are the kinds of jobs that you have to get. You have to get.
Sanjeev?
I mean, the later I answer, the easier it is for me. So I think we've covered just about everything. You're talking of innovation, digitization. These 2 words have become one of the key pillars of every successful company's strategy. But I think we need to continuously focus on, the semiconductor, alternate, sustainable energy space, because that seems to be one of the emerging spaces. Of course, financial services is pretty mature. So is manufacturing, fast moving consumer goods. So I think my take would be all of that. And in summary, diversifying away from oil-based, because this is such a perfect platform, which the American community could use also as a gateway to the East.
Zoltan, what verticals are you seeing the most activity in from your perch in all of this? So
I second Natalia. I think that certainly fintech is something that is extremely active, and I think that it resonates very well with what UAE wants to achieve. And obviously Citi as a bank, we're trying to find ways of cooperation and how we can actually tap into that particular market. But more broadly, I would say that any verticals that is knowledge-based and requires a certain level of education and knowledge of that particular segment should be targeted. And interestingly, what we see is that you are in Middle East, right? So it's, at least in the past, it was all about hydrocarbon, it was all about oil, but now we are talking about renewable energy, right? In UAE, and we talk about agri-tech. I think these are very forward-looking industries whereby UAE, I think, realize has to play a role, and hence I think that without picking one over the other, my point would be is that whatever is knowledge-based, I think that's a direction for UAE.
Knowledge-based, thank you. Ramsey, I'm going to come to you in a minute with the question of the hour about Saudi Arabia and some perspective on if there's a UAE dispute or not with Saudi going on, and what's the arc of that. But before I do, I'm getting more and more questions as the president of the U.S.-UAE Business Council about if the UAE is making all these business reforms, if a company can come here and be 100% owned and doesn't need a partner or an agent necessarily onshore. What in a few sentences each, Salman and Sanjeev, tell us why should they be still setting up in a free zone? I mean, I know to all of us it's probably pretty simple answers, but a lot of companies back in the US are asking this question of me right now. So Sanjeev, you first, and then Salman, please. Why a free zone if everything is being reformed to allow more business onshore?
Well, I think I can speak from the perspective of DMCC without obviously and understandably trying to oversell us, but obviously you're going to be doing business with DMCC, for example, which is the world's best free zone for the last 6 years in a row. Of course, you will consider factors such as ease of doing business, you know, the ecosystem. You know, when you're getting into an ecosystem of 19, 20,000 companies and their tertiary relationships from a commodity and trade perspective. Obviously, for financial services, we spoke and we agreed DIFC is a state-of-the-art place. The reputation for a young organization of 20 years to have achieved the diversity, to have, you know, led the way, not only for agri-softs, but also for precious metals and stones. You know, with the speed of change is admirable. You know, you look at us being one of the leading diamond trading centers in the world, there was a need and a call for diamond financing, because you would have seen a lot of commodity trading as well as diamond financing institutions were withdrawing. And we moved ahead and declared a partnership with Emirates NBD, which is the largest financial institution, to roll out a $200 million financing facility and double that to within the next 5 years. So that those measures, you know, make that difference. Of course, the aftercare support and the specialization is the industry clustering. So at the end of the day, it's a fair playing field, and you choose the most and the best suited ecosystem that you want to be part of.
So it's about the business services and the ecosystem that you provide.
Yes.
And it's no longer about what you're going to provide necessarily versus, you know, in the broader region versus onshore. So maybe even the term free zone is quickly becoming obsolete in this instance. Salman, can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think the first thing about free zones that you have to understand is that, and I can speak on behalf of the DIFC, is that the very concept of the free zone was itself incredible innovation. So in the case of a financial center, right, which is why we're the only financial center in Dubai, financial free zone, was to be able to provide all of the attributes that Sanjeev talked about, which is the ease of business, clustering, having the world's top talent all in one place, right? But then your question is, what happens when you start to equalize and normalize for things like ownership and capital movement, et cetera? Well, in the DIFC, there are a couple of things that are still highly differentiated, which is by virtue of being a financial free zone, right? We have an independent financial regulator, which has equal footing to any regulator in the world, right? Except that we don't print money, right? So that's one distinguishing characteristic. The other one is that we are an English common law jurisdiction, which means that the conduct of business and the contracts and dispute resolution can happen within the framework of the DIFC, and that's tried and tested. One comment on data, by the way, it should be known, it's public information now, that we are the only non-sovereign jurisdiction, one of 10. So there's 9 sovereign entities and DIFC that is in line for UK GDPR adequacy. And so getting data protection right from is super important as well across the board.
Got it. We're going to continue unpacking this for our members. We continue to have a lot of get a lot of questions on this, and I'm going to be driving those questions back to my friends in the law firms, DLA Piper and others. But Ramzi, the big question right now that a lot of people are asking there on everyone's mind, I think there's even a new directive out from Saudi Arabia this afternoon about moving headquarters, again, reiterating the need for companies to move headquarters to the kingdom. At the same time, they have relaxed the air restrictions, and now folks can fly back and forth between the UAE and Saudi. Put all this in perspective and for us a little bit, and describe, if you will, what's going on, and where does it, most importantly, where does it go over the next year or two?
Absolutely, and I'm going to pull a few of the other threads that we've been talking about into this topic as well. So there's some healthy competition going on commercially between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and there's some unhealthy competition going on as well. You know, the healthy competition, I would say, is that Saudi Arabia is a much more appealing place to work and live than it was, certainly 10 years ago, but even 2 years ago. That's the feedback that I get from the people living in the market. With the opening of entertainment and concerts and movie theaters and whatnot.
Maybe being able to get it, maybe even being able to get a drink in a hotel by the end of the year, right?
Correct, absolutely. The unhealthy competition that I'm seeing, and that many people will not see, is the attack on the customs union. I would say, attempts to undermine, Dubai's and JAFSA in particular's role as a logistics hub, and that the cross-border shipments that go from JAFSA into Saudi Arabia, and I'm seeing increasing soft barriers to trade, through customs and taxes, and that's concerning. But what I do think, where I think this goes in the future is, Salman and Zoltan talked about a lot, the appeal of clarity of rules and regulations in the commercial space. But what I think is really important about the project of the 50 is actually it gives a lot of clarity and certainty on your personal self, and and that leads into your property rights. The decriminalization of alcohol consumption, decriminalization of cohabitation, green visas, golden visas, these are all meant to get people to permanently settle here and permanently invest here. And that is what was missing. That is what, the Dubai and the UAE have been trying to do. And that is something that Saudi Arabia is 10, 15 years away from. And so I think this, this healthy competition is working in our favor in the UAE as well. And lastly, I want to, Danny, you asked about, the verticals, what we're seeing in terms of verticals. And I wouldn't say, I'd rather talk about trade flows, and reiterating what I said, whereas 10 years ago, Saudi Arabia was the #1 most important market, and it probably is still that the same way today. The focus of the business community here isn't just on Saudi Arabia. The number of Chinese nationals living in Dubai has grown exponentially. Just search Russia, UAE, you'll see the number of bilateral deals. The UAE had the ambition to be the hub for Africa for years, and that's really coming to fruition. So the way I wrap this up about the competition is, Saudi Arabia is working to catch up with Dubai and, emulate some of the successes of Dubai, whilst the UAE is looking on the horizon at the bigger picture.
Would all of you agree that there's room for more major ports, more major airlines, more major production centers for advanced technology in a region that has a small market to begin with, and when you look in global terms, because of the proximity to Asia and Africa, or not? I mean, I'm just trying to understand how much of this competition could become destructive in the course of the next few years. Maybe Salman, Sanjeev, Zoltan, maybe you comment on that a bit.
I'm happy to do so. So look, first of all, what Ramzi spoke about in terms of the healthy competition, I think as UAE will have more and more ambition to compete on a global scale, then I do believe that, you know, FDI in the world that is, you know, a trillion plus globally, and we are talking about what $25 billion for UAE that flew in 2020. Is there room? Yes, there is room. So it's the question of, you know, what is the aspiration of UAE? What is the aspiration of Saudi? And if we are playing on a global scale, then certainly there is room. I think what is important is that all the different countries in the Middle East, they try to find their turf, their advantage. And it might be different for Saudi than it is for UAE, right? We spoke about all the industries in UAE. It might not be the same that others have to target. And hence, I think that if everybody's playing to their strengths, then we should be able to strike a balance.
Salman?
I was actually, yeah, so I agree. I was just going to say that competition has proven to be really, really advantageous for an economy and a culture that is aspirational and competitive. So my first instinct is not to arbitrarily or set limits on the number of things that countries or economies ought to do. I think the market is a relatively good arbiter of those kinds of things, and to the winner in certain pockets will go the spoils. That being said, regionally, a bit more integration and cooperation, and I say that in quotes, integration, cooperation, I think would absolutely increase the pie. And so whether it is, you know, interstate commerce or, you know, the GCC rail or those kinds of connectivities, I think, you know, passporting or quasi-passporting, right, in financial and other services, all of those things would still, I think, increase the pie.
Thank you. Sanjeev?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you look at access to global markets within a 4 to 6 hour flight radius, you're looking at a sizable part of portion of global economy. So obviously, if you're looking at expanding westward, so for businesses to discover the American markets, this seems to be a perfect center port, and in the reverse order for American businesses and their communities to expand eastward. So the hemisphere becomes much more accessible, and with the dependability, reliability, the environment, I think it seems a perfect place. So yes, positive outlook.
Okay, so there's room for healthy competition between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It just has to be managed well at the top, which I think the leaders are trying to do and will do. I have great confidence and faith there. I'm going to throw another one on the table. You all are multinational centers for business and trade. How much are American companies complaining, raising concerns about the China relationship here and the huge influx of, it's been mentioned, of Chinese into the UAE, into the region, the huge influx of investment and trade. Can American companies compete here? Ramsey?
You know what, Danny, I'm going to pass on that question, pass to one of my other panelists. You surprised me with that one.
All right. Well, I mean, I've been here for 2 weeks, going around meeting. I think I've had now 60 or 70 meetings, and Saudi Arabia and China have been raised in my universally in every single discussion I've had. So I know it's on people's minds. Sultan, can I get you to say something about it? Zoltan?
Yeah, look, Citi is a US bank, right? So certainly in the banking sector we are, and quite a few others as well in the IFC. We obviously, because of being an international bank and you know, being present in 100 countries, naturally we support multinational companies, and we do support, you know, Chinese companies. We do support US companies as well. Now, whether in our conversation with US companies specifically, did it come up? I don't think so, or at least I have not heard on a, you know, great scale. And maybe because that's more like, focusing on all the positive measures that are being taken. But what I can say is that actually quite a few US businesses look at UAE as a hub, right, and continue to look to UAE as a hub. And the same goes for Citi. We recently announced a very few global wealth hubs in the world, and one being in UAE. So I think that can be my reflection on the subject.
Okay, Salman and then Sanjeev, just a sentence or two on competition with China here.
We have not heard anything specific from our US companies, but I would spin the answer and say, what is a US company? I mean, all of the big US companies are global companies, right? So there's multiple P&Ls with multiple jurisdictions. So the US companies with which we're familiar, all the big banks, multinationals have presences all over the world. So short answer is I haven't heard anything.
And they have their own interests, their own business interests in China as well. A market of 1.5 billion of people coming into the middle class for the near term. Go ahead, Sanjeev. Any thoughts?
See, for me, it all depends on the specifics, and without naming businesses, I've had instances where a US company wants to buy an Iranian product, for example, and buys it through a UAE company. So it all depends on how you structure. At the end of the day, you have to promote trade and let it keep going. So, there's no one answer which fits every question, but yeah, it depends on the specifics. But, collaboration will continue. How we present that collaboration is a different discussion altogether.
All right, that's fair. A fair point. I usually end panels like this with a question of what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about for the future? But coming out of COVID, I'm going to flip it a little bit and say, what's your for each one of you, real quick around the room, what's the most positive thing that you're looking forward to in the next few months, coming out of our departure from the COVID situation in the world? And I'll start again with you, Natalia. Sorry to put you on the first, but just a very positive point that you're looking towards.
I think for us here at DLA, we're really looking forward to getting back to not normal. I don't want to use that phrase that we all hate, the new normal, but being able to see clients, being able to speak to people properly again. I think what we've all realized is that this is great. Being able to see people on a screen from wherever they are in the world is brilliant, but it's not the same all the time. It'd be really nice to be able to sit down face to face. So I think it's, building those relationships is something that's really important, and I'm looking forward to that. Great.
Sanjeev?
Oh, there's lots to look forward to. I mean, last week, I was attending a meeting discussing the non-oil trade economy, and the very interesting comment I heard is we're back to very exciting levels, both in terms of trade. If you look at the real estate market, it's shown growth. I mean, the expo is something exciting to look forward to, and on a more DMCC level, I'm working on, at least in addition to the current projects, 7 or 8 very exciting projects, especially with markets such as Israel, etc., opening up. So it's all very positive. I mean, and these challenges have been handled so well. So that's given that additional comfort for us to take it to the next level.
Thank you for mentioning Expo and the Abraham Accords with Israel. Ramsey, I know you might have to jump here in a second. Do you want to give your one bullet sentence on what you're hopeful about?
I was going to say Expo 2020 is what I'm looking forward to. It's 6 months of fun, followed by the Qatar World Cup in 2022. So those are personally what I'm looking forward coming out of COVID, and the world coming to us rather than us going to them.
Great. Sultan?
Look, I think all of the previous speakers were mentioning the main ones, but I think what is going to be probably for myself the most interesting is how the working from home, working from office, how is it going to be balanced out, right? What is going to be the right way of managing? Because I think that it's unlikely that we are going to go back to where we were before, right? 100% office. I think that it's going to be a combination of office and using technology in the right way and right balance. And of course, Expo 2020, definitely 1st of October. I think we have to see, what it holds for us.
Zoltan, thank you, and I could not agree more on your point. Salman, you're going to get the last point here, so we have high hopes.
Oh man, you can't top all of the other comments. Look, I'm excited about the sentiment. I'm excited about opening up Dubai to the world, and I'm excited about what's to come as we build the future of finance.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance and thank you for your participation in today's webinar, co-hosted with DLA Piper. We really appreciate that very much. We have some exciting programming next week in Washington. We're doing an event on the Abraham Accords with the UAE Deputy Chief of Mission in Washington, Shamar Gargash, and Benjamin Krasna, her counterpart at the Israeli Embassy in Washington, D.C. That'll be next Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And then we're hosting, as I said earlier, a number of events with His Excellency Abdullah bin Tuk Al-Mari, the UAE Minister of Commerce, of Economy, and the UAE Minister of State for Foreign Trade, His Excellency Dr. Thani bin Ahmed Al-Zayudi. That's followed by the grand opening of Expo, if you will, on September 30th, with a huge event here in Dubai, and the first day of the Expo on October 1. Could not be more pleased and excited to help bring all of that to all of you. And with that, if I could say thank you again, and have a wonderful evening and a great day ahead. All the best. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.